Morning. Great to see all of you here in Steamboat. I love this place, mainly because what Jennifer just said, it represents the spirit of America. And it embodies that spirit, as do all of you that are here today. Washington wrote in his first inaugural that the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government is staked on the experiment in the hands of the American people. It is that spirit, that sacred fire, that we need to revive and rekindle as we go into our country's anniversary. I'm going to begin at dawn on June 23rd, 1775. A large company had gathered at the Pennsylvania State House. We now call it Independence Hall, where the Continental Congress had been meeting. City militia, a fife and drum band, a troop of armed cavalry, ready to meet an important but small entourage for its trip from Philadelphia to Cambridge. As morning came, so did the people of Philadelphia to witness the historic event. All eyes that morning were intent on one man, a large presence of impeccable bearing. His person, one eyewitness observer said, was exactly what you would wish. His deportment easy, erect, noble. 3 days earlier, George Washington had been commissioned General of the Continental Army, newly created after it burst into existence from the villages of Middlesex, Massachusetts, just northwest of Boston. 2 months prior to that, there had been a major skirmish in the Massachusetts countryside between local militia and a significant force of British light infantry. They had been sent from occupied Boston, passing through a small village called Lexington, in search of nearby rebel ammunition, supposedly hidden in a township called Concord. If there was a ceremony that morning, June 23rd, it was brief. The night before Washington's departure, the first vague but disturbing news had reached them that there had been an attack on colonial forces at a place called Bunker's Hill in Charleston, overlooking Boston. If the shots fired at Lexington and Concord launched colonial military preparations, the unfolding news of Bunker Hill ignited an all-out war effort. Most members of Congress were there that morning to send off the commander. John Adams of Massachusetts, powerful advocate of the colonial cause. Sam Adams, his firebrand but older second cousin. The Virginia delegation, Peyton Randolph, Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry. A few new members, John Hancock, the merchant from Boston whose sloop Liberty had been seized by British customs officials and unsuccessfully prosecuted for smuggling. The bon vivant colonial agent, Benjamin Franklin, had just arrived back from France, returned from London to avoid arrest. But somewhere in that crowd, standing in the back, was the newest delegate of the Continental Congress, who had just arrived 2 days prior. Tall, lanky 33-year-old. He would have preferred to stay in Virginia. His wife was pregnant with their second child. But he had been added 6 weeks into the Congress, dispatched there as a last-minute replacement. Nevertheless, he took his place, coming with a reputation for literature, science, and a happy talent for composition. 1 year from that date, in June 1776, Thomas Jefferson would draft for the Second Continental Congress a declaration that to this day remains the greatest and most beautiful statement of human liberty ever written. There are many reasons why one might come to love one's country. It first appears in the connection to place, a bond to a physical location, usually associated with where one grew up. It extends from parents and family to home and hearth, school and church, neighborhood, community. The familiar places that Alexis de Tocqueville called the habits of the heart. It was in the same vein that Edmund Burke said that to make us love our country, it must be lovely. What made a country lovely on the surface were its physical features, like these beautiful mountains around us. But Burke was referring to the customs and manners that form a natural affinity and inspire loyalty to one's homeland. Love of country is an extension of these affections, this love of a place, its people, and its way of life. But such attachments are personal and can be superficial unless they are transformed into commitments with real substance. This deepened attachment occurs when connections reach beyond ourselves to extended family, to those of other generations, to ancestors unknown. Links to those before us broaden our perspective, provide us with a sense of place in time, and make us part of a larger narrative and a shared experience. We begin to sense a tradition worth preserving and passing along to those who come after us. Tocqueville makes his point in Democracy in America by distinguishing between what he called instinctive patriotism, rooted in custom and belonging, place, and reflective patriotism, based more on the opinions of free citizens who understand their common liberties and shared responsibilities. Indeed, one of the main reasons why Tocqueville loved America was that it produced both types of patriotism. He concluded that a patriotism of particular loyalties and universal principles was the source of cohesion needed to perpetuate the democratic model. Without patriotism, instinctive patriotism for sure, but especially reflective patriotism, democratic peoples would become preoccupied with narrow private concerns and come to neglect their civic duties. The result is societal division and civic apathy, as formerly self-governing citizens become themselves passive subjects in a modern, impersonal nation-state. Sounds like today. Without this dual patriotism of the heart and the head, America's thriving republic, Tocqueville warned us, would be overtaken by a new form of democratic despotism that flattens the human spirit. Today, patriotism is often criticized as an unthinking allegiance to chauvinistic urges. Yet it is love of country that is thoughtful as well as passionate, that stands against the cultural relativism that plagues our society, and which undermines the defense of liberty by its disingenuous embrace. Patriotism, rightly understood, has always been the civic antidote to what C.S. Lewis called the poison of subjectivism. The American founders understood this. You see it in their writings, especially about education. Patriotism of place and principle are perfectly compatible here, indeed inseparable. In a Republican regime, education shapes the private character that allows the individual to govern the self, but also imparts the principles necessary for individuals to practice self-government. The individual is transformed into the citizen through the expansion and deepening of natural attachments, as well as the cultivation of civic knowledge. And the textbook, the reader, the primer, around which this education was to be constructed, the creed of America's civic life and political identity, its temporal scripture, its epic poetry, was the Declaration of Independence, the defining act of the great drama of the American founding. Why is it so important? The Declaration begins, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station. But then, rather than appealing to history, which usually means the rule of the stronger, the Declaration appeals to a standard that transcends history, to the laws of nature and nature's God, to both reason, as in the great tradition of thinking going back to the Greeks and Romans, as well as revelation, at least that general revelation by which we know God's created order. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It doesn't say, we have some opinions. It baffles my mind to think that after years of debates and deliberation, in committing treason on the edge of war, that the signers of the Declaration would pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to a subjective value statement. The Declaration is built on an implicit declaration that the human mind is able to know things. This metaphysical freedom is axiomatic in the Declaration's universe and is the foundation of our freedom. Then it says that all men are created equal. Well, that seems to be patently untrue. Human beings differ endlessly in obvious ways. Size, shape, color, strength, beauty. Just look around. The writers of the Declaration knew this just as much as we do. That's not the point. The difference between men overlooks the implicit assumption that the distinctions are made among creatures categorized as man. And that begs the question, in what way do they resemble each other? We have already assumed that and verified the answer. You by listening, and me by speaking. By nature, man thinks and deliberates, speaks and communicates, decides and acts accordingly. Man alone, the animals, has what the ancients called logos, reason, or what is translated in the Bible as the Word. The Declaration also says that we are created equal. Man is unique in a unique category and is created as such. This implies a consideration of man alone, but of man within creation. On the one hand, man is not an animal, although he can be barbaric. On the other, as Genesis says, man is created in the image and likeness of God. That he is created gives man a particular dignity in the order of things. He's drawn to vices and sins, passions and desires, yet there is a divine aspect of man's nature, understood by both the classical and Christian thinkers. So what are these rights we always talk about? Life, but not mere life. Human life, of mind, body, and soul. It is this provenance of man, having been created, that makes life sacrosanct. Liberty, not license, not licentiousness, but liberty, specifically using the Latin phrase, libertas, meaning the freedom appropriate for free men. And that beautiful phrase, the pursuit of happiness. The medieval scholastics had a great term, and they wrote about status viatoris. Man is the only being that by nature is constantly in a state of being on its way, viatoris. From which we get the idea of life as a long journey towards something we are searching for. Not immediate happiness, not pleasurable happiness, not what makes you feel good, but ultimate happiness, which is the end of all classical thought. In Christian terms, we speak of a journey towards something, a pilgrimage, and that after a long and good life, we will come to our end to be blessed with a beatific vision. So what about government? The Declaration says to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The Declaration objects to parliaments imposing taxes on us, regulating us, quartering troops among us, all without our consent. If we are equal, then no one, not a king, not a ruling class, not an intellectual elite, not an administrative state in a far-off capital city, possesses a right to rule. Only a government that derives its power from the great body of the people is compatible with the genius of the Americans, the fundamental principles of the Revolution. America's founders set up such a government. This had never been done before. And they set out to accomplish it across a great continent. And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The way they succeeded is found in our Constitution, the greatest and most successful written constitution in world history. A constitution designed to uphold the principles and secure the rights of the Declaration. My friends, America is a good country, even a great country, the greatest. Not because it is perfect. It is made up of imperfect human beings like you and me. Has its share of original sin and recurring wrongs, but it is great because it is dedicated to and always aspires to uphold permanent principles about human liberty that are true. Through its noble efforts to achieve its highest ends, this country has done more to advance those principles than any other in the world. America is beautiful, not only for its spacious skies and amber waves of grain, you recall the patriotic hymn, but for its glory tale of liberating strife. And the cause of all these good things, the source of America's true greatness, is the Declaration. It was Augustine who pointed out long ago that nothing can be truly loved unless the object of love is known in its nature and its very being. By defining our common loves, our native country, our common commitment to a republican government based on equal rights and political liberty, the Declaration unites our hearts and our minds in a civic friendship of enlightened patriotism. We must know the Declaration if we are truly to love America. On the evening of July 10th, 1858, speaking from a hotel balcony in Chicago, Abraham Lincoln addressed a massive gathering of political supporters who filled the streets and listened from rooftops and windows of nearby buildings. Lincoln had just recently been nominated by the Illinois Republican Party to challenge Stephen Douglas in the United States Senate race that fall. His speech was primarily responded to Douglas, challenging his compromising and ambiguous position on the leading issue of the day, slavery. But coming to the end of his address, Lincoln paused and he quieted the crowd. He asked for their indulgence and then proceeded to make a few remarks appropriate for a gathering around the time of July 4th. We run our memory back over the pages of history, he said, and we discover that we were then, in point of numbers, vastly inferior to what we are now, with a vastly less extensive country, vastly less everything we deem desirable among men. then we remind ourselves of the good that was done and how it was started and who was responsible for that great achievement. And when we look back, we discover a race of men living in that day whom we claim as our fathers and our grandfathers. They were iron men, Lincoln said. But by the time Lincoln spoke in Chicago in 1858, the living history of the Revolution was gone. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died moments apart on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration. Charles Carroll, the last of the signers, died in 1832 at the age of 95. There were no longer our fathers or our grandfathers or old veterans among us who could remember the War of Independence. The forest of giant oaks, a young Lincoln had called them, were now gone, quieted not by the invading armies, but by what he called the silent artillery of time. Without those living men, without seeing them and hearing them, their stories told from father to son, passed down from one generation to the next. What connects us to them? Now, some among us may be descendants by blood of those men or ancestors. What about the rest of us? In Lincoln's time, or today, if they look back through history to trace their connection with those days by blood, Lincoln lamented, they find they have none. They cannot carry themselves back into that glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are part of us. The answer is found in the Declaration. There is something more to all those fireworks, those parades and celebrations of American independence, something beyond the material connection or the ancestral relation. There's something else that links us to the men of 76. Those who are not direct descendants cannot trace their history to those days by bloodline. But Lincoln explained. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that that moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men. That is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it, as though they were blood of the blood or flesh of the flesh of those who wrote the Declaration. While our living ancestors and those old men may be gone, the Declaration recognizes the father of all moral principle in them, meaning in all of us. It is when we read it and understand it and understand its truth, and that truth transcends history, tradition, place, ethnicity, skin color, then we realize that we are connected to those who signed the Declaration and fought that revolution. At that point in his speech, when Lincoln said they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of those who wrote the Declaration, the Chicago Tribune reports that there was long and loud and sustained applause. And Lincoln added, and so they are. It turns out that we are indeed connected by a common ancestor, the father of all moral principle, that unites us as a people in common purpose and gives meaning to our common citizenship. Lincoln then used a metaphor The electric telegraph cables by 1858 crisscrossed the whole nation and had just made the first transatlantic connection. He used that metaphor to describe the Declaration and how it links Americans and the whole world, all the friends of liberty. That, he said, is the electric cord. In that declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men throughout the world. 2.5 years later, when Lincoln was sworn in as the 16th president of a nation on the verge of civil war, that rhetorical electric cord would become in his first inaugural the mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriotic grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, which Lincoln hoped, like Jefferson's harmonizing sentiments in the Declaration, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. In 1860, another generation arose to fight for that old Declaration. They too were Iron Men. My friends, we will soon begin the 250th year of our country's life. As a nation, we must take this rare opportunity, rare political opportunity, when we have the concentration of our whole country, not only to celebrate, but also to relearn our history, the history of the good people of these colonies who struggled and resisted, dreamed and created, fought and died to found this great country. We must also rediscover those truths that are self-evident. The Declaration of Independence draws us to things that are beyond the material, allowing us to see a world imbued with meaning and to grasp the transcendent truths that truly set us free. We must educate ourselves. We must steel ourselves. And so live our lives that all of us, men and women, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, are also made of iron, ready and willing to support that declaration. In this country, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, mutually pledged to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you.